Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. In our reading today in Matthew chapter 4, we get some information and really an example of how to overcome temptation. And I think this is a very timely reading for us as we enter into the new year, and with many people perhaps making some New Year's resolutions in connection to their spiritual life. Maybe they want to live a more holy life. Maybe they want to cast off certain sins that they were involved in before. Maybe they want to live a life more connected to God, whatever the case may be. But as we've seen probably in previous years, as we've made resolutions, is that sometimes we start off well in the year with the right intentions, with the right heart, wanting to do the right things in the upcoming year. But as time passes by, we fall to the wayside as temptation gets the better of us, as life kind of throws its challenges at us. Those New Year's resolutions kind of dissolve, and we find ourselves right back where we were before. Well, in Matthew chapter 4, we have Jesus himself overcoming temptation and showing us how to endure temptation and even overcome temptation. It's a very interesting thing when you really look at the various temptations that he underwent. Satan tempted him 3 times in the wilderness, and there's a connection between each 3 of these temptations. In verse 3 of Matthew chapter 4, it says, "And the tempter came and said to him, 'If you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread.'" And then in verse 5, in the second temptation, it says, "Then the devil took him into the holy city and had him stand on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, 'If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. As it is written, he will command his angels concerning you. On their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not strike your foot against the stone.'" And then the third temptation is found in verse 8, where it says, or beginning in verse 8, and it says, "Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, 'All these things I will give you if you fall down and worship me.'" So these 3 temptations, to turn the stone to bread, to jump off of the pinnacle of the temple, to basically show himself as a righteous person that would even be rescued by the angels in jumping off of this pinnacle. But thirdly, offering the nations, basically giving Jesus a back door, another way to the nations other than the cross. But in all 3 of these temptations, basically what we see the tempter or Satan doing is trying to get Jesus to operate and to work for self and to become self-focused. And that seems to be Satan's approach here. He wants him to focus on how hungry he is so that he will turn the stones into bread. He wants him to, in pride and self-exaltation, to jump off of the pinnacle of the temple to prove himself as the Son of God and as a righteous person. He wants Jesus to only think of himself in trying to bypass the cross to receive the nations and all the glory that comes with that. And when we think about the fact that Satan these 3 times is tempting Jesus to really act and to work for himself and to be self-focused, we can kind of think about the fact that that's kind of what all temptation is. Nearly every temptation that we encounter is a temptation to do what's best for us. Either what will exalt us, what will please us, or what will preserve us, or anything else like that. We oftentimes are tempted because we are wanting to go after our own desires, and we want to promote ourselves, do what's best for self, and things like that. And we know that in the spiritual life, we are called not to live according to the self. And it's no wonder why Jesus taught so many times that in order for us to truly follow him, we have to deny self. We have to take up our cross and follow him. There's a call to the denial of self inherent in following Jesus. And what we find is that when we get to the point where we are no longer interested in ourselves, when we become less self-focused and we become more God-focused, that it basically takes the air out of temptation. It basically pulls the rug out of temptation, because temptation cannot breathe, it cannot operate, it cannot affect us when we are not living according to the self. And so it's very important for us, as we're taught in Romans chapter 6, to remember that we've been crucified with Christ. Our old self has been crucified with him. And as such, we are no longer to be slaves of sin. And those two things are connected. When we truly consider ourselves as crucified with Christ, our old selves being put away with in the tomb with Christ, it really takes the power away from sin. And so one of the things that we learn here is that if we want to stick to our resolutions, if we want to stick to living a life of more holiness and connected to God in the upcoming year, we've got to deal with self. It's not just enough to try to overcome temptation individually as it comes, and try to wrestle with this temptation and deal with that temptation as it arises. The best thing to do is to deal with the self and to not become so self-focused. If we can do that, all temptations will then begin to lose their power. But notice how Jesus deals with these temptations. He overcomes these temptations by focusing on God. Yes, denying himself, that's kind of inherent in what he's doing here, but directly he's turning the attention back to God. After being tempted to turn the stones to bread, he says, "Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God." He's focused on God. I don't need bread. What I really need is God. I need the words of God in my innermost being. When he was commanded to, or when Satan tried to get him to throw himself down from the pinnacle of the temple, he said in verse 7, "On the other hand, it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." Not mentioning himself at all, just saying you're not supposed to put the Lord your God to the test. It's a commandment not to do that. He's focusing on God again. He doesn't want to test God. Focused on that aspect of it. And then when he was tempted to bow down to Satan so that he would receive all these nations, again, he's focused on God. In verse 10, "Then Jesus said to him, Go, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only." So that's the other side of the coin when it comes to us overcoming temptation. The first is to deny self, realizing that temptation feeds on self-interest. But the second thing is to turn our attention to God and make God the number one focus in our lives. When we live each day just breathing in God, worshiping God, loving God, being devoted to God, getting into his word, praying to him, worshiping him continually, as we are focused on God and not focused on ourselves, it makes overcoming temptation all the more possible. And one way we can help ourselves not be so focused on self is to focus on God. And it can give us something else to think about besides our own comforts, our own desires, or our own self-promotion and things like that. So as we read Matthew chapter 4, especially this section about the temptations of Jesus, let's think about the commitment that we're making this year. Whatever it might be, whatever your resolution might be in connection to the spiritual life, remember that the only way we will ever find success over sin, over Satan, the only way we'll really be living a successful spiritual life is to do these two things, basically. To deny self and to focus on God. Very simple, not always easy to do, but very simple and very practical. But these are things that we can do to help us to stick to our commitment to Christ. Not just the New Year's resolutions, but to our commitment to Christ that we made when we came to faith in him. So these are some things we can reflect on and think about as we do a reading today. With that, guys, I do thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.